let's get started. So we are, as you may note, getting very close to the end of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. The Israelites are camped comfortably on the eastern side of the Jordan River and are getting ready to cross over and conquer the promised land. Despite the fact that we still have the entire book of Deuteronomy still to read, geographically, the Israelites are not going anywhere. They are essentially where they are. And this will be essentially their jumping off point into the book of Joshua. The book of Deuteronomy, when we get to it, you'll see, is essentially a recap, rehash, restatement of stuff that has come before, sometimes with the addition of new details. But in terms of geography, nothing new. That means that the Israelites are at the essentially at the end of their journey. And in last week's parasha, part of what we read was the law about the lottery in which the land was assigned in terms of who got what spade, both by some odd, unexplained combination of size, which was used to adjust the amount of territory they got, but the geography was by lottery, right? So you were going to get territory in the north. How big or small would then be adjusted for the number of people you had. I want to share my. I did. Oh, there it is. Okay. Hopefully you can see the map. So let's do a little geography. The Israelites have conquered the eastern side of the Jordan River. Right? If you look about halfway down the Dead Sea, you'll see a black line that's going to the right, under which it says Wadi Arnon. Okay, Wadi Arnon is the southern area of the land of Gilead. And if you go a little just above the top of the Dead Sea, just below the territorial border of Ammon, you'll see a town called Heshbon. And I wish I could make this bigger, but it does not seem to allow me to do so. And Heshbon is the city of Sichon, which has been conquered. And the territorial conquest goes all the way up. If you go up to near the area of the Sea of Kinneret near the top, you'll see a river coming off to the right called the Yarmouk. That territory is essentially the discussion which we're about to enter. the Israelites have conquered this territory from the various groups that inhabited it, including Sichon and Og being the two most notable ones as kings. I'm going to leave the map up, but I'm going to start reading chapter 32, and then we'll pause, and then we'll go back to the map. The Reubenites and the Gadites owned livestock in very great numbers. Noting that the lands of Jazer and Gilad were a region suitable for cattle and livestock, the Gadites and the Reubenites came to Moses, Eleazar the priest, and the chieftains of the community and said, Atarot, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, El Ale, Sabam, Nevo, and Baon, the land that the Lord has conquered for the community of Israel is cattle country, and your servants have cattle. It would be a favor to us, they continued, if this land were given to your servants as a holding. Do not move us across the Jordan. Okay, so if you look toward the map, you will see that these various cities that are mentioned here in our parasha are all scattered throughout this area on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Some of the locations are a little fuzzy. So this map puts a question mark next to them, going like, yeah, we think it's that one, but maybe not so much. All right. But the territory is nonetheless the same. Okay. Amongst the places that is mentioned here is Nevo. Right. If you look on the map, all right, just above the top, of the Dead Sea, okay, just a little to the right, you'll see Nevo. Okay. If the name Nevo sounds familiar, Moses is going to climb the mountain that is in the area of that city, Nevo, and it is from there that Moses will look out across the Jordan to see the entirety of the land of Israel. Okay. You can see where Nevo is, and you can see how close it is to the Dead Sea and to the Jordan River. Because the other reality is there's a mountain line that runs through what is now the country of Jordan. Right? And as you come down off the mountains, there's a slope, and it takes you to sort of the plain area on the eastern side of the Dead Sea.
The plains of Moab.
Right.
It's speech.
Right? So, which is interesting because the Moab is technically south of the Wadi Arnon and not territory that the Israelites conquer, because Moabite territory is prohibited to the Israelites because it's given by God in Genesis to the Moabites. Okay, so that's kind of the lay of the land. Right? And what is it that the Reubenites and the Gadites, or the Gadites and the Reubenites, are asking for? They're asking to inherit this territory. Why? Because it's good grazing land, apparently. And in fact, centuries later, the late 19th, early 20th century. I don't remember exactly when he did this, but there was a historian named and a photographer named G.A. Smith. No reason why you would have ever heard of him. But as part of his description of the land, one of the things he says is in Moab, the scenes which throng most of our memory are the streams of Gilead in the heat of the day, with the cattle standing in them. And in the evenings, we sat at the door of our tent near the village well and would hear the shepherds pipe from far away. And the sheep and the goats and the cows with heavy bells would break over the edge of the hill and come down the slope to wait their turn at the troughs. We were never long out of the sound of the lowing of cattle or of the shepherd's pipe. So his depiction in many ways echoes the idea that we find already inherent here in the Torah, that this is a good place for livestock of all sorts. What's going to be the well, actually, even before we get to that, look at verse 1. The Reubenites and the Gadites, right? And then look at verse 2. The Gadites and the Reubenites, right? And verse 6, the Gadites and the Reubenites. Are you noticing a trend?
Yeah.
Verse 25, the Gadites and the Reubenites. Verse 29, the Gadites and the Reubenites. Verse 31, the Gadites and the Reubenites. Right? What are you noticing?
It started with the Reubenites the first time, and then it went to the Gadites. Did they take prominence?
Yes. All right. So the question is, why does verse 1 mention the Reubenites first, whereas the rest of the story always has the Gadites first? So, and why are the Gadites first? Because generally the Torah likes to do things by chronology. So one of the things that we discovered during the period of the monarchy is that the tribe of Reuben is conspicuously absent from most of the historical records reflected in the book of Samuel, the book of Kings, and any stories about the Moabites. God, not Reuben, is identified specifically during the reign of Saul, who's the first king. During David's tenure as king, the census that he does only mentions the Gadites and not the Reubenites. Right? David's son Solomon follows him as king, and the 12th district of Solomon's kingdom is known as God. Right? Reuben, no, not mentioned. Right? King Mesha of Moab, in an inscription that he leaves behind, only mentions God and not Reuben. When we read this list and the one at the end of the chapter, and the lists are more or less the same with a few little differences, the towns of God are listed before the towns assigned to the Reubenites. Interestingly, where we have in verse 1 the Reubenites going first, whereas all of the others have the Gadites going first, the Septuagint, the Greek translation, and the Samaritan translation reverse the order and place the Reubenites first each and every time. So we're left with a bit of a question as to what happened to the tribe of Reuven. And we're also left with the question of why do these two translations go against what is literally the order of things as it appears in the Torah? So,
Would that be a translation problem with from the Greek to the?
no,
Okay.
no, I mean, Reubenites, Gadites, Reubenites, that, sometimes you get into translation issues and problems.
Right.
This would not be an opportunity to use that as a,
Right. I know that Greek sometimes, instead of reading right to left or left to right, they also did an alt.
yes,
Thing
but
like
that
this.
too would have been,
uh,
that would not account for the order in which they appear, because if you're accustomed to reading this way, the way the Greeks sometimes wrote, it,
So the Reubenites, just to emphasize, the Reubenites are becoming less important, or they're leaving.
Why do they start with the Reubenites?
all right, so we're left, so the first question is easier to answer in some ways. It seems clear that the Gadites become the predominant tribe on the eastern side of the Jordan. And in fact, the layout of their cities suggests that they surrounded the Reubenites and probably at some point absorbed the tribe. It's not that dissimilar from what happened to the tribe of Shimon, which was a smaller, weaker tribe, and was essentially absorbed into the tribe of Judah.
Would that apply to Benjamin as well? He's a small tribe, no?
Benjamin was also a small tribe, but we don't seem to read anywhere about it being swallowed up by anybody else. And it doesn't seem to disappear quite as dramatic from the stage, if you will, quite as dramatically. So it seems that Reuven will be in a state of decline, despite its having an abundance of livestock. As for why the Torah here and then the translations, what we might be seeing is just a vestige of the redactor giving priority to the older tribe, even though they are now the lesser tribe. And so it gives a nod to it at the beginning of the story, but leaves the rest of it unchanged because it's the Gadites that are the driving force in our story. As for the translators may in fact pick up from the nod given by the redactor to the Reubenites and says, oh, if it's Reuben and Gad in the first verse, I'm going to correct it all the way along, even though the text in front of me is different.
In the very next sentence, actually.
Yes, in the very next sentence and in all the ones that come afterwards. The advantage that the translator into Greek and into Samaritan, the advantage that they have is if you are reading the text in translation, chances are you're doing it because you don't or can't read it in the original. In which case, you're never going to know that it doesn't have it in that order.
You can see this.
Okay. So
Go ahead, Bill.
Rabbi?
Oh, yes. Bill.
I was gonna, yeah, thank you. I was gonna ask, can people today track back to which tribe they may have originally been from? I realize you still have Kohanim would link back to, but other than that, anybody tell what tribe we're linked to?
Not really, in part because what happens to 10 of the 12 tribes?
They're gone. I mean,
They're gone.
Right.
They are out of here. All right. And they're out of here really early in the story in many ways, in that the conquest of the Northern Kingdom happens around 722 before the Common Era, which means that they disappear and are absorbed into the greater population of, let's say, Mesopotamia, because they're taken up that way, and at that point they kind of like just melt into the Mesopotamian morass of peoples. Within the tribes that are left, right? We don't have great information, though someone did a study of people who think they are Kohanim, and they found a genetic marker that seems to be common amongst Kohanim, suggesting that they are all descended from a source. To my knowledge, no one's done anything similar for people who think they are part of the tribe of Levi, to see whether, in fact, there's a commonality amongst, a genetic commonality amongst Levites. And then theoretically, pretty much the rest of the Jewish world are descended from the tribe of Judah. Except for those who might have Shimon ancestry somewhere lurking in the background before Shimon is absorbed and swallowed by the tribe of Judah. Excuse me. I suppose, given things like that's not ancestry.com, it's the other one. It's the
23andMe.
23andMe, thank you. Given things like 23andMe, I suppose it might become possible at some point to do some kind of study that would determine whether, in fact, we really are all related. Weird stuff happens. It might be harder going forward.
What do we say of David and his ancestry or his predecessors who weren't?
Okay, well, we know that King David has a Moabite ancestor.
Maternal or paternal?
Maternal. Remember, Ruth. Ruth is his grandmother.
Yep.
Okay, so grandmother, great-grandmother, either way, but yeah, it's on the maternal side. All right, so we know that there's a certain amount of commingling that happens, right? We don't know exactly how much commingling happens along the way, but we know that it happens. One of the things that, becomes a point of contention between the Jews who returned from Babylonia and the Jews who remained in the land of Israel was that many of the Jews in the land of Israel had taken non-Israelite, non-Jewish wives, producing thereby, I'm going to guess, many parties of the third part. What's not as clear is the degree to which those people might have been marginalized out of the Jewish core. In other words, the Jews who come back from Babylonia become the dominant Jewish population in the land of Judah and in the Second Kingdom and in the Second Temple period. So there may have been a certain amount of self-purging, if you will, but it's not clear, and you know that would be a hard thing to, without a time machine, to do a study for. But post that Second Temple period time, while there are Jews who are all over the place geographically, Jews by their preference tended to be very self-limiting in their interactions with the outside world. And the outside world was very limiting as to its interactions with the Jewish world. You know, so until you get to modernity, in some ways, the Jewish community is encased in a bit of a bubble, both of its own creation and by external creation, which thereby limits the introduction of outside genetic material. It's part of why you have certain Jewish genetic disorders that sort of proliferated because of the narrow gene pool that Jews operated within.
That's in the last few hundred years more so, right?
Well, it had to be true even before that, because think about, you know, the Jewish community didn't, you know, the Jews who lived in Spain. They didn't meet Jews from far away all that much.
They can trace Sephardim further with ancestry than they can Ashkenazi, because records are lost. So there's that Sephardic site with ancestry. We did something with that once here.
Well, I think in some ways the Sephardic community was, I'll call it, somewhat blessed by having less upheaval.
Mediterranean.
For a time, yeah.
No, the reality is that the Jewish community under Islam, even when things were not so good.
I mean, afterwards, I guess. I mean, they moved. I mean, they went to Italy. They went to.
Yes, they do move.
Africa,
They do move, but they do to a great degree remain very insular. So even when they're living in areas where there are other Jews, they don't always want to play in the sandbox. You know,
but the thing I think about is that doesn't that lead us into the, you know, the who is a Jew question kind of thing that comes up, not in a positive way either.
well, I guess the question becomes what are the parameters or definitions? If I'm going to start doing genetic testing to establish one's Jewish bona fides, that could get extremely ugly and divisive. On the other hand, currently we use a more, I'll call it religion-based definition of who is a Jew, which has led to a whole lot of ugly of its own. You know, the question of who is a Jew is a significant one throughout the Jewish world. You know, the ultra-Orthodox Rabbanut in Israel increasingly denies the legitimacy of more and more members of the Jewish community, either because they disapprove of their behavior or They disapprove of how they entered the community.
Conversion.
Right, so, the reality is that, people who went through conversion in this congregation at any point in its history will not be accepted everywhere in the Jewish world, both here and in other places. Someone whose conversion I do, that person can't go out to the other side of the wall and attend AJ and be recognized as a member of the Jewish community, accorded and be counted in a minyan, or be called to the Torah.
Right.
Okay, so I don't have to go, thousands of miles away. I can literally just go through the wall.
It's an interesting subject. But the 23andMe thing and Ancestry and whoever else does genetic identification are only as good as the pool of information that they have. And so, for instance, they will say, okay, you have the markers of a group of people that we've identified as having come from Eastern Europe. Or therefore, or I don't know if they have a marker for Tay-Sachs or anything like that. That's a common, isn't that the one?
Well, Tay-Sachs is one of
One of
the
them.
common Jewish genetic
Right.
disorders.
There's some other,
There are definitely a handful of others.
like cancers and things, yeah.
But the problem is that if 23andMe shows that you have East European roots, you know what that means?
Usually Eastern European roots.
It means nothing
Unless they
because
were
Jews are not originally Eastern European. So Dafka having a lot of East European roots just means that, oh,
I agree with
there
you.
was a little bit of mingling going on.
I agree.
Yeah,
with
well, Broad did 23andMe because it was a present from somebody. And he comes up because his dad isn't Jewish, mostly Italian, and they thought there was Irish, but it turns out there's French, but only 28%, Ashkenazic Jews. So the question is, who in there wasn't, 100% Jewish back when? Because there was also an awful lot of raping in Eastern Europe. And other things.
So, I mean, it's the uncertainty, I guess, is what I'm pointing to. I think.
Yeah, I would not disagree. It's a dangerous model to
Right.
use because there's not enough
Exactly.
there. It was easier to do that study with Kohanim because you're dealing with a much, much smaller pool of people. And there are many people who by name you might think are Kohanim, but are not, and know that they're not. In my congregation in New Jersey, one of the first people I met was a lovely man named Larry Cohen, who knew unequivocally that the family name, whatever, I don't remember what it was changed. It was changed to Cohen, and they have no aspirations to claiming being Kohanim, right? But because Kohanim are such a subset and theoretically are descended from a single person. Now, you're not talking about a tribal group now, though theoretically, if you sort of accept this as gospel, that everybody who's descendant of who claims to be a Levi today is a descendant of Jacob's third son, Levi. Yeah. I just don't know what kind of a study you would need to do that.
So back to.
Okay, but let us return now to
It's okay.
to our tribes here. All right, so the Reubenites and the Gadites put forth a request, right? But I want to just highlight verse 4 for a second. The land that the Lord has conquered for the community of Israel is cattle country. Right? What assertion are the Gadites and Reubenites trying to make here?
They're using God to be their advocate, his name.
God, no,
conquered for them?
more specific. Why do I care that God? Why is it important that God conquered these lands?
Because they got a lot of cattle. It's a backwards.
No, that's why they want it,
Yeah, I
but it's
know.
not.
Yeah.
But why does it matter that God conquered these? Not we, the Israelites, conquered these.
Gives it a higher
Right?
sense of, I need a word,
You do. That's the word that we need.
entitlement.
That's not the word.
Because, no, I know.
Well, it's kind of a backwards logic because they're going to say, if this land were given to your servants as a holding, do not move us across the Jordan. So they're arguing that this is why Moses, you should let us stay over here.
Keep going because
Because God has
God
given
said
us
it
this
to us.
land. God is
Yeah.
gonna-
Okay. You're on the right track here. All right. Why are the Israelites entitled to the land on the western side of the Jordan?
God said it was gonna be theirs.
That's right.
And
All
God
right.
gave
And
us
God
this-
conquered this land
What's
for
ours?
us, us being the Israelites. Therefore, their contention is it is now part of the promised land. Therefore, we can settle here because God, in conquering this land for us, has now enlarged the territory of the promise.
Yeah, but
And instead of taking our share from that side, give us our share on this side of the land that God has conquered for us.
that's a very presumptuous statement and probably taking
It
the
is
name of
both-
God in vain.
It,
Because
well, no, it's both presumptuous and pietistic, right?
pietistic,
Well, because
seemingly.
why did we successfully defeat Og and the Amorites and Sihon?
Because
And
God was on our side.
because God did it. It wasn't a yay us, we conquered
Yeah,
Sihon
God.
and Og. It was yay, God did this. Without God, we can't. And therefore, God has now conquered this land. What are we supposed to do with it?
Yep.
We're not giving it back because God conquered it for us. Therefore, someone's got to live here.
But didn't God give it to the Moabites?
The area below.
Oh, below.
All right. If you see where the area of Moab is,
Mhm.
all right, at the bottom. All right. Now there's some question because in the Torah, we're told that Sihon, which is, and his territory, which is just above that river below which is designated as Moab, that Sihon had taken his land from the Moabites. Which means that if God had given it to the Moabites, Sihon took it to the Moabites. Therefore, the Israelites should give it back to Moab because it belongs to them. Not all of it,
A part of it.
but part of it.
Yeah.
That's not really on their agenda, right? So part of what we're seeing here is an attempt to justify their claim by saying God has made this part of the promised land.
Oh,
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily wrong,
well, look,
but it's different from the original promise. And why did God allow us to conquer and take possession of this land if in fact we're not going to possess it?
I think it's presumptuous and if you look at Moses' response, he says, so, why will you do this? I mean, why will you hold back and persuade other Israelites to stay over here?
Okay, okay, so let's read Moshe's response and then let's see if it holds water. All right. Remember, what have they offered? What have they asked? All right. That we get this and we'll forego our claim to what's on the other side. Moses replied to the Gadites and the Reubenites, are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that the Lord has given them? This is what your fathers did when I sent them from the Kadesh to Barnea to survey the land. After going up to the Wadi Eshkol and surveying the land, they turned the minds of the Israelites from invading the land that the Lord had given them. Thereupon the Lord was incensed, and he swore, none of the men from 20 years up who came out of Egypt shall see the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they did not remain loyal to me. None except Caleb, the son of Yefuneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua, the son of Nun, for they remained loyal to the Lord. The Lord was incensed at Israel, and for 40 years he made them wander in the wilderness until the generation that had provoked the Lord's displeasure was gone. And now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers to add still further to the Lord's wrath against Israel. If you turn away from him and he abandons them once more in the wilderness, you will bring calamity upon all this people. Okay, so why is Moses upset?
The Lord was incensed. I mean,
No, the Lord was incensed back then.
Right.
The question is, why is Moses upset right now?
He's afraid
the
God's
same
gonna be
thing.
upset again, because it's the same thing. We're not doing what we were given, supposed to be doing.
All right,
We-
And, well,
but are they saying we don't want the promised land?
No, they're saying we want this land instead.
No, they're saying something
No,
more.
they're saying it's this is part of the promised
Th-
land, and
That's
we
what
want
they're
this part.
saying. Their response to Moses would be, we're not foregoing the promised land. We're saying because God helped us conquer this, it is now part of the promised land.
okay, but that's reading into an
No,
event or the
really.
events. It's saying that God planned it this way.
I don't know that they're saying
No,
God
it's not
planned
planned.
it this way,
Yeah.
as
Okay, or-
but you could make that argument. Otherwise, why were we successful? If God doesn't do it, why are we successful? They're not saying, yay, us for doing this.
They're saying God has conquered it for the community of Israel, and it's good for what we know how to do there. And since God conquered it, it's ours, and we should be able to use it.
Okay. Moshe is worried that the other 10 tribes are going to say, hey, you know
Let's
what?
stay
Let's
here."
just stay here. All right. Now, the question is there an interest on the part of the other 10 tribes to stay put?
Not as far as we know.
Not as far as we know. In some ways, this story is kind of the inverse of the story of the spies. In the story of the spies, 10 of the tribes say, no, we can't do that. And 2 of them say, yes, let's go. Here, it's 2 of them are going like, we're happy to stay here. And the other 10 seem poised and ready to move forward. Right? We don't know how they're reacting to this, but Moshe is fearful that it's going to undermine the will of the people to go forward, going like, it's nice here. We could be happy here. So there is a concern for a disregard of Israelite unity. And that disregard or concern is expressed again by Joshua and by Deborah. Right? Especially in the period of the judges, one of the things that we see is a fragmentation wherein tribes kind of all do their own thing, and they only get together in small little groupings when they are beset by enemies. So the tribes that are directly affected work together, but the rest of the tribes kind of just ignore them and let them do their own stuff. Right? So the question of Israelite unity is an intriguing one because we see repeatedly that there seems to be a lot of polarization, right? The Reubenites, if you remember, or you remember our good friends Datan and Aviram, they were Reubenites. And what did they want? They wanted to replace Moses and the Levites as leadership. That's not an expression of unity. So if we look at the book of Bamidbar, we have many examples. And if we go back past and we see that there are concerns about unity in the book of Joshua, the book of Judges is the ultimate expression of it. For a short period of time, about a century, that unity is achieved, more sorta, in that you have Saul, who is the king of Israel, theoretically the king of all 12 tribes, and he's succeeded by, except David, for the first 7 years of his monarchy, is king only of Judah and the south. Whereas Saul's son, Ishbosheth, Jonathan's dead. Ishbosheth is the king until David takes control of the whole country, right? And David passes the baton to Solomon. And after Solomon, what happens? The kingdom splits in two. Where'd they go? Something happened. Because I can still see them on the screen, but I can't see them on the TV.
Oh,
That's weird. All right.
This is good, because, I thought at first that we were going to say that this was sort of a legitimate argument by Gad and Rain, but from what point of view, and I think it's clear that Moses in verse 14 says, "And now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers, to add still further to the Lord's wrath against Israel." So we're all in it together, right? We're all
Okay, so Moses is rejecting their request, but he's not dealing on one level with the issue that is raised by their request, which is, if in fact God conquered this land for us, what do we do with it?
It's a good argument.
It's a good question. Does every tribe get a little piece of this side and a little piece of a bigger piece on the other side? What do you do? Is this held by the collectivity, except for the fact that because we don't have a monarch, the collectivity doesn't really act as a collectivity all that well? Right?
No, we have Moses.
Yeah, but Moses,
Moses-
remember, Moses got 1 foot off stage already. Despite the fact that we got the book of Deuteronomy, the reality is that this is the end. Moses already been told, pass the baton to Joshua, get ready to go up to Nebo and take a peek at the land that you're not going to see. And then,
I would say,
yeah,
they already had the law at that point. The Deuteronomy was the second law given, which is the repetition of the verse.
and our Israelite ancestors were known for being such dutiful, obedient servants to God and the law.
Yeah,
Stubborn and hard.
right, exactly.
Oh, wait, no, they really weren't good. And in fact, one of the phrases here, which is sort of lost in the translation, is we're gonna see it, we're gonna see it in a minute, okay? All right, so Moshe is worried about the effect that this is going to have on the Israelite community and the evocation of God's anger. All right. So this had been sort of a more public forum. The leaders of Gad and Reuven are talking to Moses and Eleazar and the leaders of the tribes of Israel in a more public forum, right? Now they respond to Moses in verse 16. Then they stepped up to him. Right? The sense here is that they get closer to him. It's like, okay, Moshe, no, you're misunderstanding. Right? That's not our intention. Right? What do they say? We will build here sheepfolds for our flocks and towns and for our children. And we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until every one of the Israelites is in possession of his portion, but we will not have a share with them in the territory beyond the Jordan, for we have received our share on the east side of the Jordan. What are they putting on record here, if you will?
Here's the deal.
We're not saying we're not going. We're not saying that we're going to sit here and let them go to war and blah, blah, blah. No. Right? Let us build fortifications and cities in which our families will be safe and our flocks and herds will be safe. And then not only will we go with the rest of the Israelites to conquer the land on the western side of the Jordan, but we'll go in the vanguard. Vanguard is not always a desirable place to be
No,
in battle. Right?
not always.
Well, it depends on how the battle goes. Right?
They're still up front.
You're still up front, all right? But part of what's being described here is in order for the Reubenites and the Gadites to leave their families safe, not only do they have to build this, but they're going to leave about 2/3 of their military force behind. And 1/3, a select group, will go with the Israelites to help them conquer the, right? Now, what will these troops not have to worry about, which all the other Israelite groups are going to have to worry about?
What if they fail?
Well, no, I mean, they all have to worry about that.
What are we gonna get?
Nope, they already know what they're all.
No, but that's the other troops have to worry about what they're gonna get and where they're gonna end up. They know they have their kids and their families safe.
You're getting close to it. Now you're close, right? Everybody else is traveling with their families. The Gadites and the Reubenites are going, our families are safe. I don't have to worry about, getting home to help change diapers because my wife's had a rough day. I can be focused. I can be laser focused on what I need to do militarily. And I don't want to make this comparison too strongly, but the Israelites who are in active duty, the Israelis who are in active duty in the army, are in a different reality than the people who are getting called up to Miluim, to fill in. Why? The people who are active army, what's their job? Army. This is what I do. 24/7, this is what I do. Right? But if I'm called up from Miluim, then I'm leaving behind, and part of my brain is there. Oh, I'm leaving work. I'm leaving my business. I'm leaving my family. I have all of these other commitments which I'm putting on hold. Now, universal in Israel. This is how Israel survives. But it's different in terms of mindset between those who are partially back behind the lines, and those who are, this is what I do every single day. This is the only thing I have to pay attention to.
Welcome to the world of the Navy, when you deploy.
Yes, when you deploy, yes,
That's
part of you is, yes, I'm in the ship in the middle of the Pacific and there ain't nothing I can do for them's back home, but that doesn't mean that part of my brain is not back home. Right? And in Israel, it's even more so, because if you're active duty, that's still your active duty. You may be leaving family behind, but you're not worried, oh, who's going to take care of my
Your
business?
duty station is Israel.
Yeah.
You
But-
don't have to
but-
worry that there'll be a job when
there.
you come back, or.
Right. So it's even more pronounced. So this way, we are prepared to be in the vanguard, right? And what does that mean? Right? Understand that what was the order of battle for the Israelites? Right? The vanguard went before the Lord. Right? That's not just an expression of obedience. It's literal. When the Israelites went to battle, the ark went with them. Right? So vanguard goes first before the Lord, i.e., the ark is behind them. And behind the ark is the rest of the army. Right? So before the Lord equals before the ark of the Lord, which equals before the people of the Lord. Right? So all of those expressions are in some ways synonyms, emphasizing the firstness of the vanguard, which we understand, but understand when they're using before the Lord, it's not just an idiom, right? The problem is that in our translation, they use the phrase at the instance, like if you look at verse 20, at the instance of the Lord. Right? At the instance of the Lord, I have no idea what that means. Fortunately, I read the Hebrew. It says Lifnei Adonai, before God. Now, part of it is he's emphasizing that he's turning their statement, their promise, into an oath. Right? He's elevating it. Right? Nice words, but we're going to take it up a level and turn it into an oath, an unbreakable oath. Moses, calm down. We're not trying to abandon the Israelites. We're not trying to undermine their desire to go. In fact, we'll go with them. Promise us this, allow us to create a safe space for our families. And not only will we go, but in the end of the whole thing, we will be the last ones to settle completely, because we're going to have to go back home. Right? Moshe is now going to repeat the whole thing. Right? But if you do this, right, we're now in oath-taking language. If you do this, if you go to battle as shock troops, Lifnei Adonai, before the Lord, and every shock fighter among you crosses the Jordan, Lifnei Adonai, before the Lord, until God has dispossessed God's enemies from before him, and the land has been subdued at the instant, Lifnei Adonai, before the Lord. And then you return, you shall be clear before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your holding under the Lord. But if you do not do so, you will have sinned against the Lord, and know that your sin will overtake you, i.e., you'll be punished. So build towns for your children and sheepfolds for your flocks, and do what you have promised. All right? This is now a classic oath formula. And in fact, the rabbis use this as a paradigm for what an oath, a conditional oath, needs to look like. All right? It's stated twice, first in the positive and then in the negative. The conditions precede the consequences, and the condition has to be something that is capable of being fulfilled. In other words, you can't make an oath to do something that's impossible. Okay, so what happens to all of Moshe's objections?
These two,
He's like, oh,
they stop, they go away.
go.
He gone, right? Some modern scholars have suggested that objection on the part of Moses, all right, that sort of verses 6 through 15 may in fact be from a different strand of narrative, because it's, you know, because he sort of, he goes back really quickly on his objection. Okay. Right. The other thing that Moses does is build towns for your children and sheepfolds for your flocks and do what you have promised. Right. He reverses the order. When the Gadites and the Reubenites presented their proposal, we'll build sheepfolds for our flocks, and then we'll build towns for our cities. And Moses going like, no, you got it backwards, guys. Take care of the family first and the other stuff later. Right? Okay, our time is up, but the Reubenites agree. And the whole thing is restated. And then Moses gives instructions to Eleazar and the heads of the Israelites. Why? Because what was started as a public forum became a private conversation, and Moses is now bringing it back into the public realm where the leaders of the Gadites and Reubenites are going to make this public oath in front of Eleazar and Joshua and others, who are the ones who are going to have to enforce and determine if in fact this oath was fulfilled. And spoiler alert, I will tell you that in chapter 4 of the book of Joshua, Joshua declares that the Gadites and Reubenites have in fact met their stated obligation as reflected in this oath. So what for a short time seems like it's a problem moment, actually I think emerges in the end as a great example of Israelite unity, which may or may not have lasted, but at that one moment, we seem to see it emerge.
It's interesting that it wasn't Moses who came up with that idea. It was the Reubenites and Gadites who came in and said, well, look, here's what we'll do.
Well, because Moshe is in this scenario kind of bipolar. I don't mean that in a clinical sense, in that he's looking at it, it's either you do X or not X. You do what God wants, or you do the opposite. And when you do the opposite, bad stuff happens. Right? Moshe is looking at this as a very bipolar choice. You either follow God, you either are loyal to God, and anything else is not loyal to God. And the Gadites are going like, no, we're not trying to not be good Israelites.
We're not trying not to be.
Yeah.
We're trying to be what God wants. We're not trying to abandon God. We're not trying to abandon Israel. Right? Now, I will tell you that this is not the first and last time where we'll have some issues with the Gadites and the Reubenites. Somewhere, I think, in the book of Joshua. the Reubenites and the Gadites decide to put up an altar. Well, that's a no-no according to the book of Deuteronomy, if you remember.
Mhm.
And so this creates a source of tension because you're now creating multiple altars for God. The problem is that there were lots of altars all over the place. But it's perceived because of the geographic separation as creating an alternate religious center, right? In the same way that Yeravam, when the kingdom splits after Solomon, what does he do? Well, amongst other things, he creates two cultic centers in the northern kingdom because otherwise people were going from the northern kingdom to Jerusalem. I was like, no, I can't.
Bethel and forget what the one that was up with the.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of that.
There was two.
But there, he creates two of them because it's a big space and he doesn't want people traveling to Jerusalem. In the same way that, I don't want to compare the two completely, but where is the seat of the Catholic Church?
Rome, but they did have a second place up in France someplace. I forget what they were.
At a certain point in time, all right? But what I was gonna do is, and when
And then the
when
Catholic
when
Church
the Greek Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox split off, they create other venues. This is the seat of the Greek Orthodox Church. This is the seat of the Eastern Orthodox Church because you are not going back to Rome. No, just no. Right? Because if you keep going back to Rome, then this bifurcation is not gonna last. Right? Because so when the Gadites and the Reubenites try to do it, and their sort of pushback is like, well, we're just trying to make it a more convenient way for us to worship God. But the problem is once you establish this idea of a central one place.
But it wasn't the only place.
I understand that. But how it was perceived may have been different depending on where you were sitting. If I'm a Reubenite or a Gadite, I'm going like, the tabernacle is way over there, but it also goes to the question of, is that area the promised land?
Yeah.
Because before David builds the temple in Jerusalem and the book of Deuteronomy becomes the definer of where the cult will worship, people were worshiping all over the place. You're 100% right. But once that happens, it's like, this is the spot. Until it happens, you have a lot more latitude, but it does create other layers of divisiveness.
Side out of mind. Yeah, that's the real history. I mean, you see that all over the place where you want a king, okay, Saul's your king, you anoint him and everything. And he looks good, he's big, but he's powerful.
Yeah, it's what you think you want, but you're not gonna like it.
The real question is, where is your center? Is it just geographical, or is it the law of is it the Torah? Is that your center, or is it someone who says this is the place, this is the place, or this is the place?
Well, look, ultimately, David is trying to merge the political and religious center of the kingdom as a way of consolidating all authority in one place. prior to the, prior to that, the Mishkan was kind of the central focus, but the Mishkan traveled. Not as much
The people
later on,
traveled
but
with it.
theoretically,
So did everybody else.
Yeah, they
all
were
right,
with it.
the book, if you read the book of Samuel, Samuel is constantly going from place to place to place to offer sacrifices.
And there was a requirement to come to the center place. So what if you? what if
There
you're
was,
up in,
but the center place is somewhat of a later idea, which is why Samuel is traveling around the country to local shrines and celebrations, right? If you, if you are supposed to have only a central place, then all those local shrines are verboten, which comes to be true, but it really, in some ways, I don't think really becomes true until the Second Temple period, when the land of the kingdom of Judah is a significantly smaller territory than the land of Israel at its full expansion under Solomon. You know, what's the capital of the United States?
Washington DC.
Yes, that was not a trick question, all right? And Washington DC has a national this and a national that and a national da 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 da.
Yeah.
All right. What do you think would it even be reasonable to suggest that the only place you can worship is in Washington because that's the national capital?
It's ridiculous.
It's totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
All right. Why? Because no one from Montana is coming to DC every Sunday to worship at the National Shrine, even though we've got one. Because it's the concept is ludicrous. Right? We have decentralized worship because it doesn't work otherwise.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, initially, Washington made sense as a location because, you know, you
It
had
was
the
central on the coast.
north and you had the south, so South Carolina or Florida, all the way up to Maine.
Well, we didn't
Yeah.
have Florida at the time, did
sorry.
we? Florida was still Spanish at the time,
Oh,
and the idea,
okay.
yeah, but it's the
The
coast.
Carolinas, but it was all coastal and
And
it was
it
sort of
was-
halfway.
Georgia, South, Georgia.
Yeah, because we started out what Pennsylvania, then to New York, and then it was supposed to be land that wasn't belonging to a state, so
This where the
Maryland, it
Continental
was a
Congress
slum.
met.
Yeah.
Where was it safe to meet? It was New York,
Yeah.
they moved it to Philadelphia.
It made sense in,
Right.
you know, 1780 something
Right.
or 90, whenever it is that they did that. All right, at the time that they did it, it made perfect sense. But then the country kept expanding and expanding and expanding. So if I wanted to put it somewhere central,
Kansas.
or Nebraska, I don't know. Yeah, somewhere out there, all right, in the middle of a cornfield, all right? But once it's established, it's established. You're not gonna suddenly move it once you've established it as a viable thing.
Ottawa.
Ottawa's in the middle of nowhere. Ottawa is the most ridiculous place because it literally, I mean, yes, it made sense in that it was on the border between Quebec and Ontario. Right? And, you know, and even now when you send things to the federal government, sometimes you're sending them to Ottawa, sometimes you're sending them to Gatineau. Gatineau is just on the other side of the Ottawa River and the Rideau Canal from Ottawa proper. And so you have lots of governmental buildings, made perfectly sense. But the truth is, it's the middle of nowhere. It's like,
I remember being there.
what was on the border between,
Yeah, little over 50 years ago when they were floating logs down the river.
Rabbi,
yo.
had my hand up for a while to try to tell you that
The problem is that the TV spritzed out, so I'm only looking at the computer monitor, and on the computer monitor, you're about this big. So I can barely see that you're a person, much less that you're holding up your hand.
Ah, well, that's why you couldn't see that Bill was holding up his hand a while ago, but he's really off to the side. So you're getting even a smaller picture. But I was raising my hand just to let you know that Bill was trying to say something a while ago or ask something.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bill, what's
Yeah.
your question?
Thank you, Rabbi. I was going to ask back to your description of the army. And I got to thinking about, if I understood your sequence, you had the vanguard ahead of the arc, and behind the arc was
The rest of the army.
but I was thinking, and then behind the rest of the army would have been the mass of people.
Or you would have left the people camped somewhere with some
Military.
military protection.
If they were still marching, what I was thinking was, if they were still with all together, you would then put part of the army to the rear to make up for the mistake they had with the Moabites earlier we had talked about, where they got ambushed from the rear. The
Right. No, I look, I'm sure that
not the Moabites, the Amorites.
yeah, no, I'm sure that the people were not always going to the battlefield areas, but when the army came back from the battlefield, they went back to where the people were.
Yeah. It's a good, safe system.
It was about the only viable system, given the fact that the army was the people were traveling with the army and vice versa.
And it wasn't like at the Red Sea where they're crossing the sea. The movie image we see is you have a bunch of children and the elderly all in the rear of the column. They were all got massacred if the heavy waves had not come out and destroyed the Egyptian soldiers.
Well, I would not read too much into the movie versions of this, because my guess is that, my image of it is people walked and traveled as family units.
Okay, but you still would have had a bunch of unarmed people against
Oh,
the
absolutely. But
chariots and
remember,
everything.
but crossing the sea, the Israelites don't have an army yet.
They probably didn't even have any weapons, or very few.
Well, I mean, the theory, the Torah says that the chamushim alu, it said that they had weapons. The problem is, what have the Israelites been until the Exodus? And what are they lacking? They've been slaves. They've been downtrodden. How much military training have they had?
None, I guess.
None. All right. So arming untrained civilians doesn't usually have good outcomes. So having a weapon doesn't necessarily make someone into a soldier or a warrior. I remember way back in antiquity, being at summer camp. And one of the things that the camp offered was riflery. So you were taught how to shoot a weapon. Now, I early on, as I was learning, okay, so they would mount a target on a wood backboard, and you were supposed to lie there and aim and shoot. Okay. Perfect shot that missed the target, the backboard, and hit a squirrel. Now, nobody believed that I was aiming for the squirrel, despite my repeated contentions that I was aiming for the squirrel for the whole time, not the target.
Sure.
And I'm going like, no, I was aiming for the target. I just missed really badly. And it happened to hit a squirrel. All right. A marksman, let's just say I was not. Right?
You were a legend.
Only in my own mind. All right. So having a weapon, even sort of knowing how to use it, does not make a soldier. Right? Handing an Israelite a sword or a spear. Oh, this is much heavier than I thought. does not make, all right. So having weapons and being able to use them are two very, very, very different things. Okay. On that amusing anecdote, let us wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Well, you are welcome as always.
That's wonderful. It's good.
It's always good.
Thank you, Rabbi. I guess you need to get a bigger TV screen.
No, the problem
No,
is that
it
the
went out.
TV screen just sort of fritzed out. I have no idea why, because we saw you, and then we didn't see you.
And we didn't
Ah.
move, so we didn't unlock it.
And since I have other things to do, I am not going to even attempt to figure out why it did what it did. Indeed.
Oh, I'm gonna tell you a story. Once upon a time, I was young, and my grandfather was very worried because Brian's dad